I'm Daniel Vaughn, 45 years old, and for 21 years, I thought I'd built something unbreakable. My wife, Rebecca, and I started a software development company from nothing when our son was barely 2 years old. We turned it into a legitimate business with 20 employees, contracts with Fortune 500 companies, and offices in downtown Denver. Two kids, a restored Victorian house in Capitol Hill, and what everyone called the perfect power couple partnership. Um, then it all shattered on a Thursday morning when I found a receipt she didn't know I'd seen. I was reconciling our company expenses for quarterly taxes, standard routine I'd done 100 times before. Rebecca handled client relations and business development while I managed operations and finance. We were Vaughn Digital Solutions, equal partners in everything, or so I believed. That's when I found it. A hotel charge for $892 at the Monaco Denver, Wednesday night, coded as client entertainment in our accounting system, but we had no clients meeting that day. I checked her calendar, blocked off a strategic planning session. I pulled up 6 months of expenses and found a pattern that made my stomach drop. Every other week, same hotel, same amount, same vague categorization. 12 transactions totaling almost $11,000. I sat there in our home office at 6 a.m. while Rebecca slept upstairs and our kids got ready for school, staring at numbers that told a story I didn't want to believe. My wife of 21 years, my business partner, the mother of my children, was either incredibly sloppy with expense reporting or systematically stealing from our company. I already knew which one it was. I just didn't want to admit it yet. I took photos of everything with my phone, uploaded them to a private cloud account. Then I did what any good accountant does when something doesn't add up. I started looking for more discrepancies. By the time Rebecca came downstairs in her yoga clothes, hair pulled back, making her morning smoothie, I'd found restaurant charges at places we'd never been for business, car service receipts to addresses I didn't recognize, and expense reports that didn't match any contracts or meetings I could verify. She kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted to grab lunch later, mentioned some meeting with a potential client. I said yes to lunch, asked about the client. She gave me a name I didn't recognize and a project description that sounded vague. Uh, I made a mental note and smiled. She had no idea I just spent 2 hours documenting what looked like evidence of embezzlement and fraud. After she left and the kids were out the door, I called someone I'd hoped I'd never need. My college roommate, Cameron Hart, now a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. We met at a coffee shop in Cherry Creek. I showed him everything on my laptop. He looked through the receipts, the patterns, the timeline, then looked at me with sympathy I didn't want. Daniel, this is textbook. She's either funding something expensive or someone expensive. Either way, it's coming from your company accounts. I asked him what I should do. He said to keep documenting, don't confront her yet, and get a lawyer who specialized in business divorces, because this wasn't just a marriage ending, it was a company dissolution. I spent the next week playing the perfect husband while gathering evidence, took Rebecca to dinner on Friday, watched a movie on Saturday, had our son Ethan over for family game night Sunday. Our daughter Olivia came home from CU Boulder for the weekend, and we all pretended everything was normal. But I was watching Rebecca constantly. The way she checked her phone every few minutes, how she'd step into another room to take calls, the new perfume she wore, the gym membership she suddenly had time for. All the classic signs I'd been too trusting or too busy to notice before. On Monday, I followed her. Not proud of it, but I needed to know. She'd said she had a lunch meeting with a vendor. I tracked her car using the GPS from our company fleet management system, completely legal since it was a company vehicle. She drove to the Monaco Denver, parked in the garage. I waited across the street in a coffee shop with a window view. 40 minutes later, she walked out with a man I recognized from LinkedIn, Trevor Ashford, Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Systems, one of our biggest competitors. They weren't just having lunch, they were having a relationship, and she was funding it with our money. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, drinking cold coffee, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I drove to a law office in Lodo and met with Catherine Reeves, the attorney Cameron had recommended. I showed her everything. The expenses, the GPS data, the photos I'd taken, the business partnership agreement Rebecca and I had signed when we incorporated. Catherine read through it all, then looked at me with the kind of professional assessment that comes from seeing this scenario play out dozens of times. Your partnership agreement has a misconduct clause. If one partner engages in financial impropriety or misuse of company resources, the other partner can force a buyout at reduced valuation. You also have grounds for fraud charges if you want to go that route. I asked what she recommended. She said to confront Rebecca with evidence, offer a clean exit that protected the company and my kids, or prepare for war if she refused to cooperate. That evening, I made dinner for the family. Rebecca came home late, said her meeting ran long. Ethan, now 23 and working as a junior developer at our company, asked his mom about the Meridian Systems deal he'd heard rumors about. I watched Rebecca's face carefully. She said there was no deal, just some preliminary conversations. Ethan nodded but looked confused. He'd been working on a competitive analysis and knew Meridian was our main rival. Why would we be having any conversations with them? After dinner, when the kids were in their rooms, I asked Rebecca to come to my office, said we needed to discuss some expense irregularities I'd found during the quarterly review. She followed me, slightly annoyed, probably thinking this was about some minor accounting issue. I closed the door, showed her my laptop, pulled up the spreadsheet I'd built with every questionable expense over 6 months, highlighted the Monaco Denver charges, the restaurants, the car services. Then I opened a browser window showing the GPS data from her company car. Wednesday afternoon, Monaco Denver parking garage. I let the silence speak first, watched her face go through confusion, then recognition, then calculation. She tried to play it off, said some of those were legitimate expenses, that I was being paranoid, that she couldn't believe I'd tracked her car like some paranoid, controlling husband. I told her calmly to stop, said I'd already shown everything to an attorney and a forensic accountant, that I had photos of her meeting Trevor Ashford at the hotel, that I knew about the affair and the embezzlement and the fact that she'd been funding her relationship with our competitor using company money. The mask dropped. She went from defensive to angry in seconds, asked if I'd been spying on her, accused me of invading her privacy, said I had no right to track her movements or question her business decisions. I reminded her quietly that company vehicles have GPS tracking for insurance purposes, that expense reports are reviewed by partners, that nothing I'd done was illegal or improper. What she'd done, however, was fraud, theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and adultery using company resources. She could go to jail if I wanted to press charges. She sat down hard in the office chair, all the fight draining out of her. Asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted her out of the house by the weekend, wanted her to sign over her partnership share at the reduced valuation our agreement specified for misconduct, wanted her to agree to primary custody of our minor daughter still at home with standard visitation, and I wanted all of the money she'd stolen returned to the company account. In exchange, I wouldn't file criminal charges or make her affair public. Rebecca started crying, said it wasn't fair, that she'd built this company too, that Trevor understood her in ways I never did, that I'd become cold and distant over the years, focused only on work and numbers, that she'd been lonely. I let her finish. Then I told her I'd been lonely too, but I hadn't stolen from our family or betrayed everything we'd built together. Said she could sign the separation agreement, or I'd file criminal complaints, divorce papers, and let everyone know exactly why our partnership was dissolving. She had 48 hours to decide. She chose to leave that night, packed a bag while I watched, threw clothes in her car, and drove off without saying goodbye to our kids. They were both out, Olivia at a friend's house and Ethan at his apartment. I texted them both to come home. We needed to talk. Ethan arrived first. He'd clearly been crying on the drive over. Asked if it was true that Mom was having an affair with someone at Meridian. I asked how he knew. He said he'd overheard Rebecca on the phone last week talking to someone named Trevor, saying she couldn't wait until she didn't have to hide anymore. He'd been suspicious, but didn't want to believe it. I confirmed everything. Told him about the embezzlement, the hotel charges, the GPS data, watched my 23-year-old son's face crumble as he realized his mother had been lying to all of us. He asked if we were getting divorced. I said yes. Asked if the company would survive. I promised it would. We'd built something solid, and one person's betrayal wouldn't destroy it. Olivia came home from her friend's house 30 minutes later, took one look at Ethan and me and knew immediately. Asked where Rebecca was. I told her everything. My 19-year-old daughter sat there on the couch, listening to me explain how her mother had stolen from our company, had an affair with a competitor, and had just left without saying goodbye. She didn't cry, just got very quiet and very still. Finally asked if Rebecca was coming back. I said not to live here, no, that they'd still see her, but the marriage was over. Olivia looked at me with eyes too old for her age and said, good. That she'd known something was wrong for months, that Rebecca had been different, distant, always on her phone. Said she'd tried to talk to her mom about it, but Rebecca had blown her off. Now she knew why. The next morning, I got a call from my office. Our operations manager, Sarah, said Rebecca had shown up demanding access to her computer and files. I told Sarah not to let her in, that Rebecca was no longer authorized to access company property or systems. Sarah hesitated, said Rebecca was making a scene, threatening to call the police. I told her to let Rebecca call them, that I had legal authority to revoke her access per our partnership agreement. I'd be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, Rebecca was in the lobby with our receptionist, red-faced and furious. She started yelling the moment she saw me, accused me of locking her out of her own company, said I couldn't just erase her like this. I told her calmly that she'd received the separation terms last night. Until she signed, she was suspended from company operations due to serious misconduct. She could fight it in court if she wanted, but she wouldn't win. That's when Ethan appeared from the elevator. He'd come in early to work on a project. He looked at his mother with disgust and said she needed to leave. Rebecca tried to approach him, say she could explain. Ethan stepped back, told her he'd seen the expense reports, had helped Sarah secure the company systems when I'd called earlier, said he couldn't believe she'd stolen from us, from him, from everyone who worked here, trusting her. Rebecca's face crumpled. She looked at me, at Ethan, at the employees who'd gathered to watch, and walked out. I watched her car leave the parking lot and felt nothing but relief. That evening, I sat down with our entire staff, 20 people who dedicated years to building Vaughn Digital Solutions. I told them the truth, that Rebecca and I were separating due to irreconcilable differences and partnership disagreements, that she'd be leaving the company, that operations would continue normally, that no one's job was at risk, that we had solid contracts and a strong pipeline. A few people asked questions, most just nodded, probably having suspected something was wrong. Sarah approached me after and said the whole office knew Rebecca had been different lately. Always gone, always distracted. Said they were relieved to have clarity finally. Over the next week, Rebecca tried everything to avoid signing the separation agreement. Hired an attorney who sent threatening letters. Claimed she was entitled to half of everything, regardless of the misconduct clause. Demanded more money for her buyout. Catherine shut it all down with documented evidence of the embezzlement and adultery. Finally, 8 days after I'd confronted her, Rebecca signed. She got $340,000 for her partnership share, about 40% of what she would have gotten without the misconduct provision. She returned $8,200 of the stolen money, all she claimed to have left. The rest was gone, presumably spent on her affair with Trevor. She agreed to standard visitation with Olivia and no involvement in Ethan's life unless he initiated contact. The divorce was filed the same day. 3 weeks later, Olivia came to me with her laptop, said I needed to see something. It was a private Facebook group called Denver Tech Community with about 800 members, all professionals in our industry. Someone had posted asking about Vaughn Digital Solutions, whether we were stable for a major contract. Rebecca had responded in the comments, claimed I'd forced her out illegally, that I'd been financially abusing her for years, that she'd discovered I was embezzling from the company and I'd retaliated by divorcing her. Every word was a lie, and it was public for every potential client, competitor, and employee to see. I felt rage for the first time since this started. Not hurt, not sadness, pure anger. She was trying to destroy the company because she couldn't have it. Olivia asked what I was going to do. I told her I was going to respond with facts. I spent 2 hours that night drafting a post. Didn't name Rebecca directly, just stated clearly that my former business partner and spouse had been caught misappropriating company funds for personal use, that she'd had an inappropriate relationship with an executive at a competing firm while still employed at ours, that she'd been offered a fair buyout per our partnership agreement and had accepted it, that anyone questioning our stability could review our financial statements, talk to our clients, or contact our legal counsel. I tagged Catherine's law firm, posted it. Within an hour, the comments section exploded. Former employees confirmed the timeline. Clients vouched for our work, and Trevor Ashford's name started circulating. Someone had connected the dots. By the next morning, Rebecca had deleted her comment and left the group. But the damage to her reputation was done. Ethan came to my office later that week, said he'd gotten a call from Rebecca. She was asking to meet, wanted to explain everything. He asked if I thought he should. I told him that was his decision, that she was still his mother regardless of what she'd done, but that he shouldn't feel obligated to make things easy for her just because she was family. Ethan nodded, said he'd think about it. 2 days later, he told me he'd met her for coffee, that she'd cried and apologized and said she'd made terrible mistakes. But she'd also tried to blame me, said I'd pushed her away, that she'd been desperately unhappy for years. Ethan had let her finish, then told her that even if all of that was true, stealing and lying weren't the answer, that she should have either worked on the marriage or left honestly. Instead, she'd betrayed everyone who trusted her. He said he needed space from her to process everything. Might talk to her again someday, might not. Rebecca had started crying again. Ethan had left. 4 months after the divorce was final, I got a call from Trevor Ashford. He asked to meet, said it was important. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown. Trevor looked terrible, thinner, tired, defeated. He told me Rebecca had moved in with him after the separation, that it had been exciting at first, the forbidden relationship finally out in the open. But reality had set in fast. Rebecca was angry all the time, blamed everyone for her situation, spent money they didn't have, started fights over nothing. He'd realized the woman he'd been seeing in hotels wasn't the woman he'd be living with. She was destructive, narcissistic, and capable of taking responsibility. He'd broken up with her 2 weeks ago. She'd destroyed his apartment in response. Now she was threatening to go to his company, claim he'd sexually harassed her, ruin his career the way hers was ruined. I asked why he was telling me this. Trevor said he needed to know if Rebecca had a history of this behavior. If this was a pattern or if he'd brought out something toxic in her. I told him honestly that Rebecca had always been ambitious, always wanted more. But the lying, the stealing, the vindictiveness, that was new. Or maybe I'd just been blind to it before. Trevor nodded miserably, said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd helped destroy a family for a fantasy that never existed. I told him he was right. Then I left. I had no sympathy for him. He'd made his choices. Now he was living with them. 6 months after the separation, Olivia came home from college for Thanksgiving. She'd been quiet about Rebecca, hadn't visited her mother once. I'd offered to arrange visits, had told her she didn't have to choose sides. But Olivia had been clear. She wasn't angry, wasn't punishing anyone. She just didn't have interest in a relationship with someone who'd betrayed her family so completely. We were setting the table for Thanksgiving dinner when Olivia said Rebecca had been texting her constantly, begging to see her, saying she was lonely and depressed, that she'd made mistakes but deserved forgiveness. Olivia asked if I thought she was being too harsh. I told her what I'd told Ethan, that Rebecca was her mother and she had to decide what relationship she wanted. But that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending everything was fine. That Olivia had every right to protect herself emotionally. Olivia nodded, said she might visit Rebecca eventually, but not yet. Not while the wound was still so fresh. That evening, we had dinner with just the three of us, Ethan, Olivia, and me. It was quiet, a little sad, but also peaceful. We talked about work and school and future plans, about the new contracts we'd landed and Olivia's upcoming semester abroad, about Ethan's promotion to team lead at the company. We were healing slowly but surely. A year after the divorce, I got a notification that Rebecca had filed a motion to modify the separation agreement. wanted more money from her buyout, claimed she'd been coerced into signing under duress, that the valuation had been unfair. Catherine called me, said it was a desperate move that wouldn't succeed, that we had documented evidence of her misconduct and her agreement had been voluntary, but it would mean another court hearing, more legal fees, more drama. I told Catherine to fight it, that I was done being charitable to someone who kept trying to punish me for her own choices. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months out. In the meantime, I focused on the company and my kids. We'd moved past survival mode into actual thriving. Revenue was up 40% from the previous year. We'd hired 6 new developers. Olivia had declared a business major and was talking about joining the company after graduation. Ethan was becoming a genuine leader in our development team. Life was good in ways it hadn't been in years. The day of the hearing arrived. Rebecca showed up with a new attorney, her third since the separation. This one was aggressive, loud, all courtroom theatrics. He argued that Rebecca had built the company alongside me, that her contributions had been essential, that the misconduct clause was punitive and unenforceable, that she deserved an equal share of the value she'd helped create. Catherine waited calmly until he finished. Then she presented the evidence. 12 hotel charges, restaurant receipts totaling $11,000, GPS data, text messages we'd subpoenaed showing Rebecca and Trevor discussing their relationship, expense reports with false information, bank records showing she'd spent company money on personal purchases. The judge reviewed everything, looked at Rebecca with clear distaste, and denied her motion. Said the separation agreement was fair, possibly generous given the documented theft and fraud, that Rebecca should consider herself fortunate she wasn't facing criminal charges. Rebecca's attorney tried to object. The judge shut him down. Case closed. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca tried to approach me. I kept walking. She called my name, said she just wanted to talk. I stopped, turned to face her, told her we had nothing to discuss, that she'd gotten multiple chances to handle this with dignity and had chosen to fight dirty every time, that I was done giving her opportunities to do more damage. She started crying, said she was broke, that Trevor had left her, that her parents weren't speaking to her, that she needed help. I felt something I hadn't felt toward her in a long time. Pity. But pity wasn't enough to make me rescue her from consequences she'd earned. I told her to get a job, rebuild her life, and leave us alone. Then I walked away. Olivia had been watching from Catherine's car. She asked if I was okay. I said I was. Better than okay. I was free. 2 years after the divorce, Ethan got engaged to his girlfriend Maya. The wedding was planned for the following summer. He came to me one evening to discuss the guest list, said he wasn't inviting Rebecca, that he'd thought about it, had even considered giving her a chance to be part of this milestone. But he couldn't trust her not to make a scene or ruin the day somehow. Asked if I thought that was cruel. I told him it was his wedding, that he got to decide who shared it with him, that choosing to protect his happiness wasn't cruel, it was smart. Ethan looked relieved, said Maya had met Rebecca once, briefly, and had been uncomfortable with how Rebecca kept making everything about herself, how she'd criticized their venue choice, their budget, their timeline, how she'd turned what should have been a happy announcement into drama. I wasn't surprised. Rebecca hadn't changed. She'd just lost her audience. The wedding was beautiful. Olivia was a bridesmaid. I walked Maya down the aisle alongside her father. Ethan cried when he saw her. The reception was filled with friends, family, coworkers, and clients. People who'd watched our company grow, who'd supported us through the divorce, who genuinely cared about our family. Rebecca's absence was noted by some of the older relatives, but Ethan handled it gracefully. Said his mother couldn't make it. Didn't elaborate. Most people were tactful enough not to push. During the father-son dance, Ethan thanked me for showing him what integrity looked like, for teaching him that you don't compromise your values, even when it costs you, for demonstrating that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. I told him I was proud of the man he'd become, that he'd handled an impossible situation with grace and strength, that he was a better person than I'd been at his age. 3 years after the divorce, Vaughn Digital Solutions had grown to 35 employees. We'd opened a second office in Austin. Our revenue had tripled from pre-divorce numbers. Olivia had graduated and joined the company as our business development manager. She was brilliant at it, closing contracts I never could have landed. Ethan was now our director of technology. We'd promoted Sarah to COO. The company Rebecca had tried to destroy was thriving in ways it never had when she was part of it. I'd stopped thinking about her most days. She'd become a cautionary tale I occasionally referenced in business discussions about partnership agreements and fiduciary responsibility. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to California, was working in real estate, had a new boyfriend, was posting inspirational quotes about fresh starts on social media. I didn't check her profiles, didn't care what she was doing. She was someone I used to know, a chapter that had closed. One evening, I was working late in the office when I got a Facebook message request from Rebecca. I stared at the notification for a long time before deciding to open it. The message was long, rambling, clearly written after several drinks. She said she'd been thinking about the past, about all her mistakes, about how she'd destroyed the best thing in her life for something that turned out to be nothing. Said she understood why the kids wouldn't talk to her, why I'd moved on, why everyone had written her off. But she wanted me to know she was sorry, that she'd been selfish and stupid and cruel, that she'd spent 3 years trying to justify her choices and had finally accepted there was no justification. She'd hurt people who loved her, destroyed trust that could never be rebuilt, and she had to live with that. She said she wasn't asking for forgiveness or a second chance, just wanted me to know that she knew exactly what she'd lost, and that it haunted her every day. I read the message 3 times, felt nothing but a distant sort of sadness, not for what we'd had, for what she'd become. Someone who finally understood consequences when it was far too late to matter. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote simply, "I hope you find peace, Rebecca, but don't contact me again." Then I blocked her. Went home to the house I'd bought myself in Washington Park, made dinner, called Olivia to check on her day, texted Ethan about a client meeting tomorrow, lived my life, the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, the life that was mine, honest, clear, and good. Rebecca had tried to burn it all down. Instead, she just removed herself from the equation, and we'd all been better for it. 4 years after the divorce, I stood in Olivia's apartment helping her pack for her move to our Austin office. She'd been promoted to regional director, was relocating to help expand our presence in Texas. At 24, she was confident, capable, absolutely crushing it professionally. We were loading boxes into a U-Haul when she said Rebecca had reached out again, through Instagram this time. Said she was proud of Olivia, wanted to reconnect. Olivia asked what I thought she should do. I told her that was entirely her call, that Rebecca was her mother and they'd have to figure out their relationship on their own terms, but that Olivia should protect herself first, not let guilt or obligation override her own emotional health. Olivia nodded, said she'd been thinking about it, that maybe she'd have coffee with Rebecca someday. But right now, she was focused on her career, her life, her future. Rebecca had made her choices. Olivia was making hers. That evening, after we'd finished loading the truck, Olivia hugged me tight, said she was grateful for how I'd handled everything, that I could have been bitter and angry and toxic, could have turned her and Ethan against their mother through manipulation. Instead, I'd let them make their own choices, told them the truth, but let them process it their own way. She said that meant everything. I told her I'd only done what any parent should, protected them while letting them grow. She said not every parent would have. That I'd shown her what integrity looked like in action, what doing the right thing cost, and why it was worth it anyway. I told her she'd exceeded every hope I'd ever had for her, that watching her and Ethan thrive had made everything worth it. 5 years after the divorce, Ethan and Maya had their first child, a daughter they named Charlotte. I held my granddaughter in the hospital, this tiny, perfect person who represented our future, and felt a completeness I hadn't known I was missing. Ethan asked if we should tell Rebecca about the baby. I said that was his decision as Charlotte's parent. He'd have to decide what role, if any, Rebecca would play in his daughter's life. Ethan thought about it for a long time, finally said he'd send Rebecca a photo and a birth announcement. But that was it. No visits unless Rebecca proved over time that she could be trusted, that Charlotte deserved grandparents who were stable and healthy. And right now, Rebecca wasn't that. I told him he was being a good father, making hard choices to protect his daughter. He'd learned that from watching me do the same. Now, 6 years removed from the day I found those hotel receipts, I sit in my office at Vaughn Digital Solutions looking at our latest quarterly numbers. Revenue is approaching 8 figures. We're one of the top software firms in the Rocky Mountain region. We have 45 employees, most of whom have been with us since before the divorce. Ethan and Olivia are both partners now, each owning 25% of the company. The remaining 50% is mine. We're building something lasting, something honest, something that will outlive all of us. I think sometimes about the man I was 6 years ago, the one who trusted completely, who never questioned, who believed love alone was enough to sustain a partnership. That man was naive. He paid a heavy price for that naivety. But what grew from the ashes of his broken marriage was stronger, wiser, and better. Rebecca tried to destroy me, tried to destroy our company, tried to destroy our family. She failed completely because she never understood that integrity isn't just a nice idea. It's the foundation everything real is built on. You can't sustain a marriage without it, can't maintain a business without it, can't raise children without it. I taught my kids that through my actions, not my words. Showed them that you stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. That you don't compromise your values for comfort or convenience. That sometimes the people you love will betray you, and you still have to choose integrity. They watched me lose my wife and keep my dignity, watched me rebuild from nothing and come out stronger. That's a lesson worth more than any inheritance I could leave them. If I could go back and prevent any of this from happening, I wouldn't. Because the man I am now, the father I am now, the leader I am now, was forged in that fire. Rebecca's betrayal didn't break me. It refined me, burned away weakness, and left only what was essential. I don't hate her anymore. Don't think about her much at all. She's just someone who used to be in my life before I learned the difference between partnership and parasitism, between love and convenience, between what glitters and what's gold. My life now is simple: work, family, integrity, building things that last, raising children who understand what matters, running a company on principles that won't shift with market trends. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's real, it's mine, and it's enough.